The silence over Helmand Province wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that made seasoned Marines check their magazines twice, scan the ridgelines with tightened jaws, and whisper prayers they'd never admit to saying. Captain Nora, Valkyrie, Reyes felt it too, 30,000 feet above the desert floor, her Thunderbolt II cutting through crystalline Afghan sky like a hunting hawk. The radio crackled with the usual chatter, grid coordinates, weather updates, fuel statuses, but underneath it all she heard something else. A tremor in the voice of the ground controller, fear wrapped in procedure. She'd been flying close air support missions for 8 months now, and she knew the difference between routine and catastrophe. This was the latter, brewing like a sandstorm on the horizon. Her hands rested light on the stick muscle memory guiding the titanium beast beneath her. The A-10 wasn't elegant. It wasn't fast. It was a flying gun with wings bolted on as an afterthought, designed for one purpose: keeping soldiers alive when everything else had failed. Some pilots called it ugly. Nora called it honest. Valkyrie, this is Havoc 2-1. The voice belonged to Lieutenant Marcus Webb, a forward air controller embedded with 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines. His usual swagger was gone, replaced by clipped urgency. We've got movement, grid November Delta 7423. Multiple vehicles. They're not friendly. Nora's eyes flickered to her instruments, then to the hardened canopy glass streaked with desert dust. Below, the mountains rose like broken teeth, casting shadows that could hide entire companies. The intelligence briefings that morning had mentioned Taliban activity in the region, but intel was always 6 hours behind reality. By the time headquarters processed information, soldiers were already bleeding. Copy Havoc, I'm 8 minutes out. Can you mark the target? A pause too long. Negative, we're under. The transmission dissolved into static and the unmistakable percussion of automatic weapons fire. Nora's pulse didn't spike. Years of training had taught her to metabolize fear into focus, to transform panic into precision. She pushed the throttle forward, the twin turbofan engines responding with a guttural roar that rattled her bones. The A-10 accelerated, not gracefully, but with brutal determination. What Marcus Webb hadn't said over the radio was more important than what he had. The silence between his words told her everything. They were surrounded, outgunned, desperate. 300 Marines, most of them barely old enough to legally drink, were about to learn the difference between training and survival. And somewhere in those mountains, someone had decided today was the day to test American resolve with blood and fire. The morning had started differently. Nora had woken at 0430 in the climate-controlled trailer that passed for officer quarters at Bagram Airfield, her body protesting before her mind fully engaged. The pre-flight routine was sacred. Check weather, check aircraft status, check ordnance loads, check herself. That last part was the hardest. She'd learned not to look too long in the mirror anymore, not at the scar tissue that ran from her left ear to her collarbone. A souvenir from her first deployment when a helicopter she'd been riding in took an RPG through the tail boom. She'd been a lieutenant then, a rotary wing pilot fresh from flight school with dreams of proving herself in a male-dominated field. The crash had ended her helicopter career but birthed something else entirely. During recovery, while physical therapists rebuilt her shoulder and neck mobility, she'd applied for fixed-wing training. The review board had been skeptical. Her former commanding officer had written in his assessment, "Lieutenant Reyes possesses adequate technical skills but demonstrates emotional volatility unsuitable for combat aviation." Translation: she'd cried during a debriefing after watching 3 Marines die in a firefight she couldn't prevent. That assessment should have buried her career. Instead, it ignited something cold and absolute in her chest. She trained harder than anyone in her class, flying extra hours until her instructors ordered her to rest. She'd studied weapons systems and tactical manuals until the words blurred together. She transformed grief into geometry, calculating attack angles and gun runs with mathematical perfection. When she'd finally earned her wings and transitioned to the A-10, Her new squadron commander had taken one look at her scores and given her the call sign, Valkyrie, the Norse choosers of the slain. Some thought it was inspirational. Nora knew it was a warning. Now she was diving toward a killbox with 11 Maverick missiles, a full complement of 30mm rounds, and a reputation that made other pilots uncomfortable. They called her obsessive, reckless, too aggressive. What they didn't understand was that she'd already died once in that helicopter. Everything since was borrowed time, and she intended to spend it keeping others from experiencing what she had. The A-10 dropped through 10,000 feet, the air growing thicker and choppier. Nora's eyes scanned the terrain below, searching for the telltale signs of combat. Dust clouds from vehicle movement, muzzle flashes, smoke trails from RPGs. The mountains looked empty, but mountains always lied. Afghanistan had taught an entire generation of soldiers that lesson in blood. The terrain favored defenders, offering countless positions for ambush and withdrawal. Every ridge could hide a machine gun nest. Every boulder cluster could conceal a mortar team. Havoc 2-1 Valkyrie, I'm 3 minutes out. Give me something to work with. She kept her voice level professional, even as her thumb hovered over the master arm switch that would bring her weapons hot. Marcus Webb's response came through broken and desperate. Multiple technicals converging on our position from 3 directions. We've got wounded, can't maneuver. They're trying to overrun us before air support arrives. Technicals, pickup trucks modified with heavy machine guns and anti-aircraft weapons, were the Taliban's cavalry. Fast, mobile, and deadly in open terrain. 300 Marines pinned down with wounded meant they'd already exhausted their organic defensive capabilities. The enemy had chosen the time and place well, catching them in terrain too rough for armor support but perfect for a coordinated assault. Nora's mind shifted into combat mode, processing variables with the speed of the aircraft's targeting computer. Wind speed, 12 knots from the northwest. Altitude, 7,000 feet and descending. Ordnance priority, guns first for immediate effect, missiles for hardened targets. Collateral damage assessment, unknown, she'd need eyes on target to make that call. Time on station, approximately 40 minutes before fuel state forced her to disengage or refuel. Copy Havoc, I'm weapons hot, paint me a target. The laser designator from Webb's position flickered to life on her targeting screen, a small diamond marking the approximate location of enemy forces. It wasn't perfect. Ground designation rarely was, but it gave her a starting point. She banked the A-10 hard left, the reinforced wings cutting through turbulence that would have shaken apart a lighter aircraft. Below, the ridgeline resolved into sharper detail. She could see the thin ribbon of a dirt road, the scattered boulders that marked ancient rock slides and their movement. 3 pickup trucks racing in formation toward a dried riverbed where Marines had taken defensive positions. Even from altitude, she could see the muzzle flashes from the technical-mounted weapons, the way dust roiled up from their tires. Her weapon systems locked on automatically, the targeting reticle turning from amber to green. The lead truck had a DSHK heavy machine gun in the bed, the gunner clearly visible as he fired toward the Marine position. The math was simple. Eliminate the trucks, break the assault's momentum, give the ground forces time to reorganize. Her finger tightened on the trigger. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon, 7 barrels rotating at 4,000 rounds per minute, unleashed a burst that sounded like the sky tearing in half. Depleted uranium rounds, each the size of a beer bottle, streaked downward at over 3,000 feet per second. The first truck simply disintegrated, metal and human bodies transformed into a cloud of debris and red mist. The second truck swerved but couldn't escape the cone of destruction. Rounds punctured the engine block, the cab, the bed, each impact delivered with mechanical indifference. The third truck driver had better instincts. He yanked the wheel hard, sending the vehicle behind a rock formation just as Nora's burst chewed up the ground where he'd been. She pulled up, climbing back to attack altitude, already calculating her next run. The remaining technical would reposition, probably moving to a new firing point to engage both the Marines and her aircraft. She needed to flush him out before he did more damage. Havoc Valkyrie Splash 2. One rabbit, stay low, I'm coming back around. Marcus Webb's response was drowned out by cheering. Even through the radio static, she could hear the relief and adrenaline in their voices. 2 threats eliminated meant 2 fewer machine guns tearing through their perimeter. But the fight wasn't over. Her radar warning receiver chirped, not a lock, but a mission detection. Someone down there had anti-aircraft capability and was searching for her. The A-10 banked into a wide orbit, giving Nora a better view of the battlefield's geometry. The Marines held a position in the riverbed, using the natural depression as cover. Good tactical thinking, but it also limited their mobility and created a natural kill zone if the enemy could establish firing positions on the high ground. She counted at least 15 to 20 enemy fighters visible, with likely twice that number concealed in the ridgeline caves. This wasn't a harassment attack. This was a coordinated attempt to wipe out an isolated Marine unit. She toggled through her weapons display. 10 Mavericks remaining, 1,000 rounds of 30mm, and enough fuel for another 35 minutes of combat operations. Mathematics met reality in the cramped cockpit, each calculation weighted with lives. Weapons represented time, and time represented survival. She couldn't kill every enemy fighter, but she could make them afraid to move, to shoot, to exist in the open. Fear was its own weapon, and the A-10's distinctive silhouette, like a flying cross with engines mounted high, was designed to inspire it. Another call came through, different voice, higher stress. Any station, this is Havoc 2-4. We've got wounded critical, need immediate medevac. I repeat, need medevac now. Staff Sergeant Daniels, the platoon medic. His voice carried the weight of men dying despite his best efforts. Nora's jaw tightened. Medevac helicopters wouldn't come in until the airspace was secured. That meant clearing not just the immediate threats but establishing air superiority over the entire grid square. It meant staying on station longer than doctrine recommended, burning fuel she might need to get home, and accepting risks that made safety officers wake up sweating. Havoc 2-4, be advised medevac is wheels up but holding at safe distance. I'm clearing the zone now. Valkyrie out. She dove again, this time spotting muzzle flashes from a cave entrance halfway up the ridgeline. Whoever was in there had a clear field of fire over the Marine position and had been smart enough to wait, conserving ammunition and position. That kind of discipline meant experienced fighters, probably foreign advisors or local commanders who'd survived years of asymmetric warfare. Nora selected a Maverick missile. The infrared seeker head already tracking the heat signature from the cave entrance. She waited for the lock tone, a steady warble that meant the missile's brain had calculated trajectory, speed, and target motion. The tone solidified. She squeezed the trigger. The missile dropped from the wing pylon, its rocket motor igniting a second later, leaving a white contrail as it accelerated downward. Impact came 3 seconds later, a flash of orange flame, a pressure wave that collapsed the cave entrance, and then silence. The enemy fire from that position ceased immediately. Nora didn't allow herself satisfaction, only assessment. One position eliminated, but the tactical situation remained critical. She pulled up, scanning for new threats, when the radar warning receiver went from chirp to scream. Someone had achieved lock. Anti-aircraft missile inbound. Training overrode thought. She yanked the stick hard right while simultaneously deploying countermeasure flares, sending a cascade of burning magnesium tumbling behind the aircraft. The missile, probably a shoulder-fired SA-7, went for the flares instead of her engines, detonating close enough that the shockwave rattled her teeth. The A-10 shuddered but held together. The titanium bathtub surrounding the cockpit, designed to withstand 23mm cannon fire, had just earned its weight. Havoc taking fire. Source approximately grid November Delta 7450. I'm engaging. She didn't wait for confirmation. The A-10 rolled inverted, giving her a better view of the ridgeline, and there, a fighter with a launch tube already reloading. The gun run was textbook, wings level, target centered, trigger squeeze. The Avenger spoke again, and the fighter disappeared in a pink cloud. 30mm rounds didn't leave much to bury. The battle developed its own rhythm after that, a lethal dance of action and reaction. Nora would spot a threat, engage, climb away, reposition, and engage again. Each gun run expended precious ammunition. Each missile launch reduced her options. The Marines below fought with renewed intensity, their fire discipline improving now that they had overhead support. She became their guardian angel, the thundering presence that kept death at bay. But guardian angels bleed too. On her fifth gun run, a burst of anti-aircraft fire stitched across the A-10's left wing, punching holes through the titanium and aluminum skin. Warning lights illuminated on her panel, hydraulic pressure dropping in the secondary system. The aircraft handled differently now, requiring more force on the stick to maintain coordinated flight. She ran through emergency procedures automatically, isolating the damaged system, redistributing hydraulic pressure. The A-10 was designed to absorb damage and keep flying, but there were limits. "Valkyrie, we see your damage. Are you mission capable?" Marcus Webb, concern bleeding through the professional inquiry. Affirmative, Havoc, still in the fight. She was lying, but lies sometimes kept people alive. If the Marines knew she was flying a damaged aircraft, they'd tell her to disengage, call for replacement air support that might arrive too late. The wounded couldn't wait. The surrounded couldn't wait. So she stayed, trading her safety for theirs, the way Valkyries always had. Time compressed and expanded simultaneously. Each second stretched into hours during attack runs, then snapped back to normal during repositioning. She lost track of how many passes she'd made, how many targets she'd engaged. The 30mm ammunition counter dropped to 300 rounds, barely enough for one more sustained burst. 6 Mavericks remained. Fuel was at bingo, minimum required to reach the nearest friendly airfield. Below, the enemy assault had faltered. Bodies littered the approaches to the Marine position, and the surviving attackers had withdrawn to covered positions, no longer attempting aggressive maneuvers. The tide had turned, but hadn't yet broken. One more push from the enemy could still overwhelm the defenders, and Nora's magazine was nearly empty. Then the radio crackled with the most beautiful sound in combat aviation. "Valkyrie, Thunder 2-1, we're 10 minutes out with full loads. You've done enough. RTB when ready." Relief flooded through her, immediately suppressed. 2 fresh A-10s inbound meant the Marines would have continuous air support. She could finally disengage with clear conscience. But 10 minutes was an eternity in a firefight. Anything could happen. She made a decision that would later appear in incident reports and pilot debriefings. Negative, Thunder 2-1. I'm staying on station until handoff. "Valkyrie, your bingo fuel with battle damage. Protocol says." "Protocol can file a report. I'm staying." She cut the transmission, knowing she just guaranteed herself a conversation with the squadron commander. Worth it. The Marines below had trusted her to stay. She wouldn't abandon them for the sake of regulations written by people who'd never heard incoming fire. The next 10 minutes were the longest of her life. She orbited the battlefield like a scarred hawk, rationing her remaining ammunition, making each burst count. When enemy fighters tried to reposition, she engaged with just enough force to drive them back into cover. When a technical attempted to flank the Marine position, she used her second-to-last Maverick to reduce it to burning wreckage. Every action was calculated for maximum effect with minimum expenditure. Finally, 2 shapes appeared on the horizon, the distinctive profiles of A-10s, their wings bristling with ordnance. Thunder 2-1 and 2-2, fresh from Bagram with full loads and undamaged aircraft. Nora felt something unknot in her chest as she watched them establish their orbit pattern, their presence immediately felt on the battlefield as enemy fire slackened further. "Thunder Flight, Valkyrie. Good hunting, the party's all yours." "Copy, Valkyrie. Thanks for keeping our boys alive." She turned north toward Bagram, the damaged A-10 protesting every control input but still flying. Behind her, the sounds of battle continued, but now the Marines had the advantage. They would receive their medevac. They would reorganize and receive reinforcement. They would survive because she'd given them time. The flight back took 40 minutes that felt like seconds. Adrenaline drained away, replaced by exhaustion that sat heavy in her bones. She ran through post-combat checklists mechanically, monitoring the damaged hydraulic system, calculating whether she had enough control authority to land safely. The answer was maybe, which in military aviation usually meant yes with complications. Bagram's tower cleared her for straightened emergency approach, emergency vehicles standing by. She didn't need them. The landing was firm but controlled, the A-10 touching down with the grace of a wounded bird finally reaching its nest. As she taxied to the maintenance area, she could see the ground crew gathering, their faces registering shock as they took in the battle damage. 23 holes in the left wing alone. Hydraulic fluid streaking the fuselage. Shrapnel scarring across the tail section. That looked like it had flown through a hailstorm of steel. Nora shut down the engines, the sudden silence almost painful. Her hands shook as she removed her helmet. Delayed stress response, perfectly normal, nothing to worry about. She'd write the after-action report later, after debriefing, after the flight surgeon cleared her, after the adrenaline fully metabolized. Right now, she just needed to sit in the cockpit for a moment, feeling the stillness, knowing that 300 Marines would see tomorrow because she'd refused to leave. The canopy opened. Her crew chief, Master Sergeant Rodriguez, looked up at her with an expression somewhere between awe and anger. "Captain, the hell did you do to my aircraft?" Nora managed a tired smile. "Brought her home, didn't I?" "Yeah, but," he gestured at the damage, "I got 20 hours of work here minimum, maybe 30. "Then you better get started." She unstrapped and climbed down, her legs unsteady. The ground felt strange after hours in the air, too solid, too still. Rodriguez steadied her with a hand on her elbow, his expression softening. "Heard the radio traffic," he said quietly. "Heard what you did out there. Every one of those Marines owes you their life." She didn't know how to respond to that, so she just nodded and walked toward the operations building. Behind her, the maintenance crew swarmed the damaged A-10, already beginning the repairs that would return it to combat capability. The aircraft would fly again. So would she. That was the job. You flew, you fought, you fixed the damage, and you did it again. The only difference was whether you did it well enough to keep people alive. The debriefing took 3 hours. Intelligence officers wanted grid coordinates, weapon expenditures, enemy force assessments. The flight surgeon wanted to know about her stress levels, her decision-making processes, whether she'd experienced tunnel vision or task fixation. Her squadron commander wanted to know why she'd violated fuel protocols and stayed on station with battle damage. She answered every question with clinical precision, keeping emotion out of her voice, presenting facts in neat columns that fit on PowerPoint slides. What she didn't tell them was how it felt to watch tracer fire arc toward her canopy, how her stomach had dropped during the missile lock, how she'd made peace with dying if it meant those Marines survived. Some things didn't translate into military debriefing language. Some things stayed locked in the cockpit, between pilot and aircraft, between fear and duty. By the time she returned to her quarters, night had fallen over Bagram. The base hummed with activity, cargo planes landing, patrols departing, the endless machinery of war that never slept. Nora collapsed on her bunk, still wearing her flight suit, too exhausted to shower, too wired to sleep. Her mind kept replaying the mission in fragments: the first gun run, the cave collapse, the missile launch, the damaged wing. Each moment preserved in perfect detail, archived in the memory banks that would later become nightmares. Her phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number, but the routing code indicated it came from within theater. She opened it. "Valkyrie, don't know if this will reach you, but I'm LT Web ground controller from today. You saved our asses out there, no other way to say it. We counted casualties after, 7 wounded, 0 KIA. That second number should have been a lot higher. My Marines are alive because you stayed when you could have left, because you kept coming back when we needed you. I don't know what call sign means, but you earned it today, choosing who lives. Thank you doesn't cover it, but thank you. Semper Fi. Nora read the message 3 times, then set the phone aside. She stared at the ceiling, feeling something shift inside her chest. The old wound, the helicopter crash, the burning wreckage, the survivors she couldn't save, it didn't hurt less. But it hurt differently now. 7 wounded, 0 killed. She'd paid her debt today, repaid the Marines who died because she couldn't help them. Not fully repaid, never fully, but enough to breathe a little easier. Sleep came eventually, bringing dreams of titanium wings and desert sky, of guns that never ran empty and fuel that never depleted. Dreams where she saved everyone, where the math always worked out, where duty and survival aligned perfectly. They were good dreams, even though she knew they were lies. Morning would bring new missions, new calculations, new chances to fail or succeed. But tonight, for a few hours, she could rest. The story of what happened over Helmand Province spread through the military community the way all important stories do. Through unofficial channels, whispered in chow halls and ready rooms, embellished and refined with each retelling. By the following week, every pilot in the theater had heard about the female captain who'd stayed on station with battle damage, burning fuel she shouldn't have had, engaging targets she barely had ammunition for, refusing to leave until relief arrived. Some versions claimed she'd shot down a helicopter. Others said she'd single-handedly killed 50 enemy fighters. The truth was both more mundane and more profound. She'd simply done her job exceptionally well when it mattered most. But reputations are double-edged weapons. The same aggression that made her effective also made senior officers nervous. 3 days after the Helmand mission, she was called to the wing commander's office. Colonel Bradley Sutton was a career officer with 30 years of service, gray-haired and cautious, the kind of leader who valued stability over innovation. He gestured for her to sit, then spent a long moment studying her personnel file on his computer screen. "Captain Reyes," he began, "I've been reading your after-action report, and the reports from your squadron commander, and the incident reports from maintenance regarding aircraft damage." He looked up, his expression unreadable. "Do you understand why you're here?" "I violated fuel protocols, sir. Stayed on station past bingo. Engaged while carrying battle damage." She kept her voice neutral, stating facts without defense or apology. "Yes, all of which are grounds for grounding pending investigation." He let that hang in the air. "However, I've also read the commendation requests from 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines. Their commander wants to put you in for a Distinguished Flying Cross. Says you saved 300 lives." Nora said nothing. There was nothing to say. Either she'd be punished or rewarded, and her opinion on the matter was irrelevant. Sutton sighed, looking older suddenly. "Here's my problem, Captain. You're the best combat pilot in this theater. Your kill count, mission success rate, and tactical decision-making are all exceptional. But you scare the shit out of me. You take risks that should get you killed. You disregard procedures when they're inconvenient. You fly like you don't care if you come back." "I always come back, sir." "So far, but statistics eventually catch up with everyone. And when you go down, I'm the one who has to write the letter to your family." He closed the file. "I'm not grounding you. Can't afford to with current operational tempo. But I'm putting you on notice. Next time you violate protocol, I don't care how many lives you save. You'll be flying a desk for the rest of your career. Understood?" "Yes, sir." "Good, dismissed." As she stood to leave, he added quietly, "For what it's worth, Captain, those Marines you saved, they'll remember you for the rest of their lives. Their children will hear stories about Valkyrie. That matters. Just try to survive long enough to appreciate it." She walked out of his office feeling oddly validated. The reprimand had come with respect, the threat softened by acknowledgement. In the military's Byzantine hierarchy, that was as close to approval as she'd get. She returned to flight status that afternoon, briefed for a mission the next morning, and fell back into the rhythm of combat operations. Fly, fight, survive, repeat. The medal ceremony happened 6 weeks later, conducted in a maintenance hangar because no proper venue existed on Bagram. Nora stood at attention in her dress uniform, feeling ridiculous and uncomfortable as a two-star general read citations and pinned the Distinguished Flying Cross to her chest. The Marines from 3rd Battalion had sent representatives, including Lieutenant Webb, who shook her hand with a grip that conveyed everything words couldn't. She saw gratitude in his eyes and something else: the weight of survival, the knowledge that he existed in the present because of decisions she'd made 30,000 feet above him. The ceremony lasted 20 minutes. She spent the next 3 hours signing autographs and taking photographs with young enlisted personnel who looked at her like she was somehow different from them, special in a way that made her deeply uncomfortable. She wasn't special. She'd just been in the right place with the right training when people needed her. Any competent pilot would have done the same. She kept saying that, but nobody seemed to believe her. That night, alone in her quarters, she unpinned the medal and studied it. The bronze star with aviation device, the ribbon's red and blue stripes, the weight of it in her palm. It represented official recognition, institutional approval, the military's way of saying her choices had been correct. But she couldn't quite square that with the reality she knew. She'd gotten lucky. The missile that locked onto her could have struck. The battle damage could have been catastrophic. Any one of a dozen variables could have shifted, and she'd be a statistic instead of a hero. The phone buzzed again. Another text from an unknown number. Captain Reyes, this is Captain Sarah Mitchell, 455th Expeditionary Operations Group. I fly A-10s with the 74th Fighter Squadron. I was in your flight school class, though we never really talked. Just wanted to say I've been following your career, what you did over Helmand. That's why I joined. To be that good when it matters. Keep flying. Keep proving them wrong. Some of us need you to succeed. Nora stared at the message for a long time. She didn't remember Sarah Mitchell, couldn't place the face or voice, but the message itself resonated in unexpected ways. She'd been so focused on her own demons, her own need to prove herself, that she hadn't considered how her actions might affect others. Other female pilots watching her career, other survivors of crashes and trauma wondering if they could come back, other people carrying burdens she'd never know about. The weight of that realization settled heavy across her shoulders, mixing with the exhaustion and pride and fear she already carried. She wasn't just flying for herself anymore, or for the Marines below, or for the memory of those who died. She was flying for everyone who needed to believe that broken things could be rebuilt, that trauma could transform into strength, that the voices saying, "You can't," could be proven wrong through sheer bloody persistence. She texted back, "Keep your head on a swivel and trust your training. See you in the sky." The deployment continued. Missions blurred together: close air support in Kunar province, convoy escort through the Korangal Valley, emergency resupply drops to isolated outposts. Some days were routine milk runs where she burned fuel and never fired a shot. Other days were vicious firefights where every second mattered and ammunition ran thin. She collected more battle damage, more commendations, more sleepless nights wondering when her luck would run out. But something had changed after Helmand. The way other pilots talked to her shifted, voices carrying a new note of deference. Ground controllers requested her by name, trusting her judgment over standard procedures. Maintenance crews took extra care with her aircraft, understanding that the machine represented more than metal and systems. It was a promise that someone would come when called, that air support meant salvation rather than empty hope. The call sign, Valkyrie, took on new meaning. It wasn't just about choosing who lived and died anymore. It was about the mythology of the Guardian, the warrior protector who bridged the gap between mortal soldiers and the gods of war. Nora didn't believe in that mythology, found it uncomfortable and grandiose. But she understood its utility. Myths gave people something to believe in when reality offered only chaos and random violence. Her deployment ended in October, rotation scheduled to return stateside after 9 months in theater. The standard fare, a brief ceremony, handshakes with senior officers, the mechanical process of out-processing that transformed combat pilots back into peacetime personnel. She packed her belongings with the same efficiency she'd brought to everything else, leaving no trace in the quarters that would house the next captain, the next believer in the A-10's brutal effectiveness. The flight home was aboard a C-17 cargo plane, metal bench seats and no windows, surrounded by other returnees who wore their exhaustion like uniforms. Nobody talked much. There was nothing left to say. They'd survived and now had to learn how to live with everything they'd done and seen. Some would manage it. Others would spend years unpacking trauma in therapist offices or at the bottom of bottles. Nora didn't know which category she'd fall into. All she knew was that home, wherever that was, waited across 12 hours and 7,000 miles. Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, Arizona. The 354th Fighter Squadron, her permanent duty station, sprawled across the desert like an industrial park dedicated to controlled violence. She'd been assigned here 3 years ago, fresh from A-10 training, and it had never quite felt like home. Just another waypoint in a career defined by movement and deployment. The other pilots welcomed her back with the usual rituals. A party at the officers' club, presentations of gag gifts, storytelling that tried to make war funny enough to bear. She participated because protocol demanded it, smiled when appropriate, accepted congratulations for the distinguished flying cross that now sat in a display case in the squadron headquarters. But part of her remained in Afghanistan, calculating gun runs over terrain that didn't exist in Arizona, listening for radio calls that would never come. Reintegration, the psychologists called it. Nora called it pretending that life could return to normal after you tasted abnormality, so profound it redefined everything. Training missions helped. Flying the A-10 over Arizona ranges, engaging simulated targets with inert ordnance, practicing tactics against imaginary enemies. The missions didn't carry the same weight as combat, but they maintained the muscle memory, kept her skills sharp for the next deployment that would inevitably come. Between flights, she mentored younger pilots, sharing lessons learned in ways that might keep them alive when their turn came. She also discovered something unexpected. She was famous. Not celebrity famous, but military famous, which carried its own peculiar currency. Articles about her appeared in military journals and aviation magazines. A documentary crew wanted to interview her about female combat pilots. The Air Force Public Affairs Office called asking if she'd participate in recruiting campaigns. She declined most requests, uncomfortable with the attention, but couldn't entirely escape it. Her story had become public property, a narrative that served purposes beyond her control. The invitations to speak started arriving. Air Force Academy cadets wanted to hear about combat operations. ROTC programs wanted inspiration for future officers. Even civilian aviation groups requested her presence at conferences and symposiums. She accepted a few, standing at podiums in dress uniform, talking about tactics and decision-making while carefully editing out the terror and blood. The audiences listened raptly, especially young women who saw in her proof that gender barriers could be overcome through competence and determination. After one such speech at the academy, a first-year cadet approached her, 19 years old, female, visibly nervous. "Captain Reyes, I just wanted to say thank you. I came here wanting to be a pilot, but my parents said women couldn't handle combat, that it was too dangerous, too physically demanding. Then I read about what you did in Afghanistan, about staying on station with battle damage, about saving those Marines, and I realized my parents were wrong." She paused, gathering courage. "I'm going to be an A-10 pilot, like you." Nora looked at this young woman, too young, too idealistic, not yet broken by the realities that waited beyond the academy's polished halls, and felt something complex twist in her chest. Pride mixed with guilt, hope mixed with knowledge of what that hope would cost. She wanted to warn the cadet about the nightmares, the scars that wouldn't heal, the way combat reduced noble ideals to survival mathematics. But she also remembered being 19, being told what she couldn't do, and how desperately she'd needed someone to prove those limitations were lies. "Then you better study hard," Nora said finally. "The A-10's not forgiving. It demands everything you have and doesn't apologize for it. But if you're good enough, smart enough, and tough enough, there's no better aircraft for keeping people alive. Just remember why you're flying. The mission isn't about proving yourself. It's about bringing everyone home." The cadet nodded, eyes shining with determination that would either forge her into something exceptional or break her entirely. Nora watched her walk away, wondering if she just inspired someone toward greatness or tragedy. Both, probably. The line between the two was thinner than most people realized. 6 months passed. Peacetime routine settled in: training flights, administrative duties, the bureaucratic machinery that occupied military life between deployments. Nora threw herself into the work with characteristic intensity, earning her spot as flight lead, then element lead, rising through the informal hierarchy that governed squadron operations. She flew well, led well, and gradually the whispers about her being reckless or unstable faded. Results spoke louder than psychology assessments. Then came the phone call that changed everything. Lieutenant Colonel Vance, her squadron commander, summoned her to his office with unusual formality. She found him standing by the window, hands clasped behind his back, posture rigid with discomfort. Before he spoke, she knew something significant had shifted. "Captain Reyes, I've received orders from Air Combat Command. You're being reassigned to the weapons school as an instructor." She blinked, certain she'd misheard. The weapons school, graduate-level training for the Air Force's most tactically proficient aviators, was the pinnacle of the profession. Instructors there shaped doctrine, defined best practices, and trained the next generation of experts. It was an honor usually reserved for pilots with 20 years' experience and perfect records. She had neither. "Sir, there must be some mistake. I've only been flying the A-10 for 5 years." "No mistake. Your record speaks for itself. Highest mission success rate in theater, tactical innovations in close air support. Most importantly, you understand how to make split-second decisions under pressure and live with the consequences." He turned to face her. "The weapons school doesn't just teach flying, it teaches judgment, how to balance risk and mission requirements, how to push limits without breaking them. You've demonstrated all of that. Command believes you should be teaching it." The implications cascaded through her mind. Weapons school instructors shaped Air Force doctrine, influenced how tactics evolved, mentored pilots who would themselves become leaders. It was responsibility amplified to institutional scale. It was also exposure, more scrutiny, more expectations, more chances to fail publicly. The safe choice would be to decline respectfully, remain a line pilot where she controlled only her own fate. But Nora had stopped making safe choices in a burning helicopter years ago. "When do I report?" 30 days. "Congratulations, Captain, you've earned this." Had she, though? Or was she being weaponized, transformed into a symbol of institutional progress, proof that the Air Force valued merit over demographics? The cynical part of her mind suggested the latter, but the pragmatic part recognized that motivations didn't change outcomes. If she could use this platform to train pilots better, to save lives through education rather than direct combat, wasn't that worth the discomfort of being a symbol? She spent the 30 days preparing, read every weapons school publication she could access, reviewed her own mission recordings, analyzing decisions with brutal honesty, reached out to former instructors for advice. By the time she reported to Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada, she'd constructed a framework for how to approach the role, not as a hero or symbol, but as a craftsperson sharing techniques refined through practice and pain. The weapons school was different from anything she'd experienced. The students were already accomplished pilots, sent by their squadrons as representatives of excellence. Teaching them required different skills than flying: the ability to articulate instinctive decisions, to break down complex scenarios into teachable components, to critique without crushing confidence. Some days she felt inadequate to the task. Other days she found rhythms that worked, seeing understanding dawn in students' eyes as concepts clicked into place. Her reputation preceded her, sometimes helpfully, sometimes not. Students arrived expecting the famous Valkyrie, the pilot who defied death over Helmand. What they got was Captain Reyes, who demanded perfection in planning, precision in execution, and honest assessment of mistakes. She was harder on them than other instructors, less forgiving of errors, but also more invested in their success. Because she knew that one day these pilots would face their own Helmand province, their own decisions about staying or leaving, their own mathematics of life and ammunition. One student challenged her halfway through the course, a cocky major named Patterson who'd accumulated impressive combat statistics and didn't appreciate being corrected. During a debriefing, after she'd critiqued his attack angle as unnecessarily risky, he'd snapped back. "Easy to judge from the safety of a classroom, ma'am, but some of us are still flying combat missions." The room went silent. Other students watched to see how she'd respond. Nora could have pulled rank, could have cited her own combat record, could have made Patterson look foolish. Instead, she called up his mission video on the main screen, paused it at the critical moment, and asked quietly, "What's your wingman's position here?" Patterson glanced at the screen. 3,000 feet back, high cover. "Wrong. He's 5,000 feet back because you accelerated without coordinating. Now, where's the backup target if your primary is obscured?" A pause. "Northwest ridge, which your wingman can't reach in time because you've opened the formation too wide. So tell me, Major, when the enemy anti-aircraft position you didn't see opens fire, and your wingman's out of position to suppress it, and you're committed to an attack run that's 10 seconds too long, who dies?" Patterson stared at the screen, jaw working. "I do, ma'am. Maybe, or maybe you get lucky and live, but your wingman doesn't. Or maybe ground forces die because you had to abort and they didn't get the support they needed." She turned off the display. "I'm not judging from safety, Major. I'm teaching from experience. The difference is I've survived my mistakes long enough to learn from them. Whether you do the same is up to you." The confrontation became a turning point, both for Patterson and the class culture. Students realized she wasn't critiquing from academic detachment, but from intimate knowledge of what happened when things went wrong. The pushback stopped. The learning accelerated. By course end, even Patterson sought her input, his cockiness tempered by recognition that survival required humility. The years at the weapons school accumulated like mission hours, each day adding incrementally to a total that eventually signified expertise. Nora taught successive classes, refined her instructional methods, contributed to tactical manual revisions. She also continued flying, maintaining her own proficiency while sharing knowledge. The balance suited her, providing purpose without the constant intensity of combat deployment. But the past never fully released its grip. Nightmares still came, fragments of the helicopter crash mixed with memories of Helmand, of missile locks and damage warnings, of voices on the radio calling for help she couldn't always provide. She managed them through exercise and routine, through the meditative focus of flight planning, through careful construction of daily life that left no space for the darkness to expand. Most days it worked. Some days it didn't, and she'd find herself in the base gym at 3 a.m., running until exhaustion replaced memory. She was promoted to major, then to lieutenant colonel. Each promotion brought new responsibilities, administrative duties that pulled her further from the cockpit. She resisted when possible, volunteering for additional flight hours, maintaining instructor status even as her official role shifted toward program management. The A-10 remained her anchor, the one constant in a career defined by change. Then came the announcement that would define the final chapter of her service. The A-10 was being retired. Budget cuts, changing tactical requirements, the endless Pentagon cycle of modernization. The aircraft that had served for 40 years would be phased out, replaced by more expensive jets with better sensors but less survivability. The decision made sense on spreadsheets. To pilots like Nora, it felt like betrayal. She wrote letters to Congress, testified before committees, marshaled arguments about the A-10's unique capabilities and cost-effectiveness. Other pilots joined the fight, creating a coalition of voices defending the aircraft. They cited statistics, combat successes, the irreplaceable value of a platform designed specifically for close air support. Some politicians listened. Most had already decided, swayed by defense contractors and modernization advocates. The last A-10 combat mission flew 3 years later. Nora wasn't piloting it. She'd moved too far up the chain of command, relegated to ceremonial roles and policy decisions. But she attended the final flight, standing on the tarmac at Davis-Monthan as the last aircraft returned from its last combat sortie. She watched it land, watched the pilot taxi to the maintenance area, watched the engine spool down for the final time. Something vital ended in that moment. A lineage of protection and violence and ugly practicality giving way to cleaner, more modern alternatives that might not work as well when tested. The retirement ceremony was elaborate and emotional. Senior officers gave speeches about legacy and evolution. Veterans shared stories about missions flown and lives saved. A-10 pilots from every generation attended, their ranks spanning decades of conflict. Nora was asked to speak, representing the contemporary generation that had taken the aircraft through its final wars. She stood at the podium, looking out at hundreds of faces, and struggled to find words adequate to the moment. Everything she prepared felt insufficient, too clean, too sterile to capture what the A-10 meant to those who'd flown it and those who depended on it. So she abandoned her notes and spoke from the scarred place inside her chest where memory and mission intersected. When I first climbed into an A-10's cockpit, an instructor told me the aircraft was ugly. He wasn't wrong. It's not elegant or sleek. It doesn't inspire with aesthetics. But I learned that beauty and worth aren't the same thing. The A-10 is worth measured in different currency. In Marines who came home, in pilots who survived damage that should have been fatal, in the calculation that lives matter more than grace. That's the legacy we're retiring today. Not an aircraft, but a promise. The promise that when someone calls for help, something capable and ugly and absolutely reliable will answer. I hope whatever replaces it can make the same promise. I hope the next generation never forgets what this one represented. And I hope, her voice caught, surprising her, I hope that everyone saved by this aircraft knows their survival meant something, that it was worth the fuel and ammunition and damage, that they were worth protecting. Because from where I sat, 30,000 feet up, looking down at battlefields that could have been graveyards, you were always worth it. She stepped away from the podium to sustained applause that she barely heard. The words had cost more than she'd anticipated, opening wounds she'd thought were healed. But that was appropriate somehow. Important things should hurt. Transitions should leave scars. Otherwise, how did you know they mattered? The reception afterward was subdued, pilots clustering in small groups to share stories and drink in moderation. Nora found herself surrounded by younger officers who'd never flown the A-10 but knew its legend. They asked questions about tactics and missions, hungry for knowledge from a dying breed. She answered patiently, aware that she was performing preservation work, ensuring that wisdom didn't retire along with hardware. Late in the evening, as the crowd thinned, an older man approached her. He was civilian-dressed but carried himself with military bearing, gray-haired and weathered, with eyes that had seen too much. He extended a hand. "Colonel Reyes, I'm Thomas Webb, Lieutenant Webb's father. You saved my son's life in Helmand Province." The name clicked into place. Marcus Webb, the forward air controller from that mission years ago. She shook his hand, feeling the roughness of a working man's palm. "Your son did his job well that day, sir. Made my targeting easier. He told me what really happened, how you stayed when you should have left, how you flew a damaged aircraft to keep them covered, how you gave them time." His voice roughened. "Marcus is married now, has a daughter, Got out of the Marines last year and teaches high school history. He named his daughter Nora after you. I thought you should know that." The information hit her like turbulence, unexpected and destabilizing. She'd known intellectually that her actions had consequences, that saved lives continued beyond the moment of salvation. But hearing it expressed in such concrete terms, a child named after her, a family existing because of choices made in a cockpit, brought abstract math into painful focus. "I just did my job, sir." "No, you did more than that. You stayed when others would have left. You risked yourself for people you'd never met. That's not a job, that's something else." He pulled a photograph from his wallet, showing a smiling Marine